Hello, everybody. It's nice to be with you virtually. I'm sure we're together in spirit. I believe there's about 600 of you. I have never been to North Carolina except I stepped over the border a couple of times. I actually grew up in Kentucky, so I'm more of a hick than you are, but I've been here most of my life, and I'm British these days. Now, back in 1978. Um, I met one of the most remarkable people I have ever had the good luck to know, Chandra Wickramasinghe. And as George has so ably explained, he comes from Sri Lanka. They have very long surnames there, and it's important to know that Wickramasinghe, although starting with a W, is pronounced as if it starts with a V. Just think Wagner. Now, that's very interesting. I didn't know about Chandra being 18 when he came over, but he's very British, but he's also very Sinhalese at the same time, and he is one of the few real geniuses you'll ever have a chance to meet, who's alive at the present time. So, in between 1978 and 1980, I was co-editing a magazine that was based in America called Second Look, which was a magazine for the public dealing with the frontiers of science and certain anomalous phenomena, as they're now called as well. And so um, I was the one of the two editors who dealt with most of the scientific content. And and the first actual book on panspermia to be published by Chandra and Fred was called Life Cloud, and the second was called Diseases from Space. And I serialized both of them in the magazine, and thereby called quite a lot of attention to them in the United States, which was good because that meant more people knew what was happening. I found them two of the most exciting and imaginative and brilliant books that I had ever read, and that remains the case today. So I got to know not just Chandra, but also Fred, because during my 6 years as a science reporter for Time Life, I one of the things I did was I wrote a big article about Fred Hoyle for Life magazine. And it didn't come out under my name because only the rewrite men in the New York office stuck their names on things that were written by other people. Never mind. And I got to know Fred pretty well, very well, and his collaborators. But the most remarkable of all was Chandra. And he was the prize PhD student of Fred and his collaborator for years and years and years, because he was the person that Fred had the most confidence in and thought was the most brilliant. And in that, he was certainly correct. Although he had some amazing collaborators, like Narlikar in India, for instance, who's a very nice man, with whom he worked on white holes. Now, just to remind you, in case any of you have forgotten, that Fred Hoyle was one of the three people who originated the steady state theory of the universe. And I was also a good friend of one of those others who was called Tommy Gold from Cornell University. And one night in 1948, the three of them went to a movie in Cambridge where they were all based. And they had previously been working on radar for the British during the war. And they saw a film that made them wonder about the circularity of time and space. And I remember Fred telling me we all went and had a coffee afterwards and sat down and started musing about what if the universe is like that. And they all started working out their equations, and very quickly they came up with the steady state theory of the universe, which Fred kept refining over the decades. Now, there was a rival idea that the universe had been created from a single point, in a giant explosion, which exactly, ha ha is the only reaction. And Fred thought that it was a crazy idea, and he called it in derision the Big Bang. But his rivals who had that theory didn't realize he was insulting them by calling it the Big Bang, and they adopted that name for their theory, unaware of the fact that it was meant to be an insult. And I don't believe in the Big Bang. I never did. The idea that the universe would just come out of a point like that, it seems to me an infantile notion. And I've even done a paper explaining away the background radiation temperature thing. But don't worry about that. That's not what we're talking about now. I only mention that because Fred was a heroic figure who defied unbelievable amounts of abuse, as all great geniuses do. I should just explain that he was from Yorkshire in the north of England and had a very broad Yorkshire accent, and he looked like somebody who might have been a farmer. And of course, at the time he was at Cambridge, which was a very snooty place then. In some ways, it still is. He was ridiculed. People couldn't stand listening to him talk because he had this non-mainstream accent. You know, he was a regional, and he might as well have been a savage from the jungle. And he was treated like that, abused and vilified and insulted for his entire time there. And this was to continue for the rest of his life for other reasons when he became a scientific renegade genius. Well, now, we come to Chandra. Chandra was from somewhere worse than Yorkshire. He was from somewhere on the other side of the world. That's even worse, you see, for insular provincial people in Cambridge. And he was from what used to be called Ceylon. It's now called Sri Lanka. Lanka being, by the way, the ancient name, the 3,000-year-old Sanskrit name of Ceylon, which they readopted. Sri just being a kind of honorific. It means like the honorable Lanka. And you find the name Lanka in the ancient Hindu epic of the Ramayana. Now, I should say that the Sinhalese of Sri Lanka are Buddhists, whereas Buddhism has mostly died out in India. It remains very strong in the surrounding regions, Ceylon, or Sri Lanka, as it's now called, Tibet, and of course, up among the Chinese and Japanese. Well, so he was looked upon askance, not because he had a bad accent, because he speaks perfect Queen's English, or now I should say King's English. But the thing is that he had dark skin. Well, I mean, that's so shocking, it's almost unspeakable, isn't it? Somebody with dark skin. And I mean, have you ever heard of anything quite so shocking? Well, he underwent so much racial abuse in his lifetime, extending till today, that it's unspeakable and vile. And sometimes I wonder what's wrong with human beings, that they even notice skin color. I don't. I should immediately say that I'm the opposite to poor Chandra, who's vilified for being brown, because all my life I've been insulted for being too pale. Ever since I was born, people come up to me and say, "You're so pale, Robert. Do you feel all right?" Everybody thinks I'm dying all the time because I'm extra pale. Well, I mean, you can't win, can you? So you get white people who think they're so superior going out and lying in the sun to get suntans, to get browner than Chandra is, and they consider that is very fine. But if you're brown naturally, oh, that's just not acceptable. So, I mean, everything's crazy. It's totally irrational and atavistic. And, well, it's a savage. We're all basically trying to restrain our savagery beneath the surface, aren't we? So, Chandra has been the victim of this kind of thing for his whole life since he got here. And he turned down a very good post at Cambridge to take up an offer from the University of Cardiff in Wales, and Cardiff being a city there, and he created a department, the Department of Astrophysics and Astrobiology, and he was also a professor of mathematics and professor of astrophysics, and he was one of the most distinguished and brilliant people who ever taught at the University of Cardiff. Now, Cardiff is a very nasty place for racism. So he's been abused in the street, called terrible names. I don't need to pronounce them. And he's had racist things written on his house. And this is just life in Cardiff. But it was even worse at the university, because when he retired, so vicious was the jealousy of his great intellect and his fantastic attainments, and so hugely did he dwarf the other people there, that they have insulted him to an unbelievable degree. Part of it racist, but can you believe he still lives in Cardiff? The university's down the road a bit. They won't let him park in the university car park. They have denied him the title of emeritus upon his retirement. All the kind of people he recruited, they're all emeritus. Oh, no, not Chandra. That's not allowed. He is not allowed to use the university library. This is worse than cancellation. This is an attempt at extermination. This is the vicious campaign launched by jealous nobodies and mediocre non-entities against a great genius. And I want you all to know that, because I don't like it, and neither should you, and I'm sure you agree with me. So, no, I mean, I've been victimized, but I'm not going to go on about that, because I don't see myself as a victim. And I won't go into any of my story, because this is Chandra's show. I'm only introducing him. But Chandra and I have been great pals. He has the most wonderful wife called Priya, that's Priya, in case you want to spell it, who's also from Sri Lanka. And the two of them together make such a wonderful couple. And he's one of the finest and most noble and honorable and people that I know. And he's completely good. He never has a bad thought about anybody, although he does get annoyed by people attacking him all the time. But he's very patient, very gentle, very kind, a really good person. He's a model person. Yes, I would say that anybody who modeled themselves after Chandra would be improving their character. So this is what Chandra's like. Now, over recent years, Chandra and I and a group of like-minded friends, George Howard being one of them, and he's right there in front of you, good old George, we have jointly authored numerous scientific papers about panspermia, and with particular relevance, many of them to the COVID virus, which may have come from space. But all that will be discussed by Chandra. The first paper I ever did on the subject was a long time ago. Chandra invited me to participate in a conference, and I'm not a working scientist. I'm a historian of science. That's different. So I gave a paper on the prehistory of panspermia, in which I pointed out that the ancient Greek pre-Socratic philosopher Anaxagoras believed in panspermia and wrote about it the whole time, about seeds of life coming from space, spermata in Greek. And I pointed out that these ideas were held by the ancient Egyptians, and I gave all the details, by the ancient Hindus in the very early days of Hinduism, the very early strata of Hinduism, before it became quite so elaborate with quite so many gods. And that's all explained in the paper. And I described Chinese forerunners. I'm particularly keen on China because I wrote a book on the history of Chinese science, and I worked with Joseph Needham. And so it's important to realize that the ideas and concepts of panspermia albeit without scientific backup, have been around for thousands of years. That's important to know. A lot of people who don't like it today behave like outraged virgins being approached by a rapist, you know. Oh no, not Panspermia, what a horrid idea. And so they take refuge in the fact that it's some kind of novel heresy. It's not a novel heresy, it's an ancient heresy. But is it a heresy or is it the truth? I say it's the truth. We have to face the fact that the cosmos is full of life, full of life, stuffed full of life. And that this stuff comes through the interstellar medium, which apparently is twice as dense as the interplanetary medium, which is continually renewed by the solar wind. You've got to get up to date, people, and realize that we live in a universe full of life. And now over to Mr. Life himself, Chandra Wickramasinghe.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, George. That's really over the top, but I'm very, very grateful for your extremely kind words about me and about the context in which I'm going to be speaking for the next 40 minutes or so. I think in this next 40 minutes, I would show you that the idea of panspermia is, again, as Robert said, not speculation, not superstition. It started as speculation and superstition many thousands of years ago, but I think now the facts are very firm and support the whole story of panspermia 100%. It is also, as Robert had pointed out, a very personal story for me. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to sort of unveil the whole business of life from space and so on, as far as I'm concerned. I want to start with a little clip from a program that was broadcast on the BBC in 1976 after we published our first book. Well, okay. Before I really go through my slides, I want to tell you that that clip is from a program that is very, very, very popular even now called Sky at Night. It was started by Patrick Moore many, many years ago, and Patrick has, of course, died. He died about a decade ago. There's a website. The BBC has a website in which all of the past episodes are downloadable, but when it comes to this particular episode, it says it's not available. Now, can you believe that? I could not believe that. This little recording that I got in black and white was from a friend who actually recorded the bits from the show as it happened in 1976, but the BBC has excised it from its archive, and I just wonder why they do this. Anyway, these are the facts, and I want to just go through my slides. If you look at the Milky Way on a cloudless night, you see this band of stars across, stretching from horizon to horizon, and in between that band of stars, you see these dark patches, and these are the dark patches that I can see. And these are, of course, the clouds of interstellar dust, cosmic dust, and the cosmic dust that I would later in my talk identify with clouds of living particles, freeze-dried bacteria. So this is what we see, and this is a site that would have greeted our ancestors for thousands of years. Prompting the most important philosophical question of all time, I believe, and that question is there life on other planets, around other stars? And where do we humans on this tiny planet fit into such a grand scheme of things? These are the questions that would have been asked for centuries, for millennia, and we have struggled to answer them, but the answers to those questions are now emerging in the last 2 or 3 decades, I think. technically and scientifically, I personally began to answer these questions only after I arrived in Cambridge in the late 1950s, in 1960. And as my friends have told you, I was working with Fred Hoyle. And within a few years, within a decade of my working there, I arrived at an affirmative answer to the question of, is there life outside the Earth? And we reckoned that there has to be life outside the Earth. And so we went on pursuing this quest for evidence from 1976 onwards. And it's in 1976 that I published, along with Fred Hoyle, the book that already Robert Temple referred to, a book called Life Cloud. And it was after we discovered evidence for organic compounds, organic molecules in space, in cosmic dust, and so on, that we published this book. And so through the 1980s and 1990s, we continued this quest. And as I said, this is a long series of articles that led to the book called Life Cloud. And such efforts, of course, received huge publicity. And it was included in the Sky at Night program that you saw the clip of, because, and the reason why it got all this exposure was because we had challenged an existing paradigm that had been really deeply entrenched in human societies for thousands of years. So we continue to provide evidence and publish papers and so on. But over the ensuing decades, there was a huge amount of institutional obstruction. We were able to publish papers in Nature up to a certain point in time. And after that, even Nature closed ranks and refused to publish anything that dealt with life outside of the Earth. And this was a very difficult journey that I then continued to pursue and to proceed along the route to finding more and more evidence. And it was a journey that was rugged and exceedingly difficult. But I had a very, very distinguished companion, a very nice man, Fred Hoyle, and the two of us together were involved in this the quest that had lasted right from 1970s to the end of Fred's life in the 2000s. Okay, this was the Moore. This should have come earlier. This was the Patrick Moore classic episode that is being taken out of the Sky at Night archive for reasons that you can imagine. The next question I want to touch on and to ask is, how did life begin on the Earth? And how did it develop into life that we recognize as plants and animals, insects, and even ourselves? How did all this happen on the Earth? Now, if you go back in the history of the Earth, in the geological history of the Earth, 4,500 million years ago, the Earth had just formed from collisions, from getting together of comets and asteroids and bits and pieces. And nothing could have lived on it for quite a few million years because there was violent impacts happening. Not even organic molecules could have survived in the first millions of years of the Earth's existence. The Earth would have looked exactly like this picture, a fiery lot of rocks and so on hurtling around. So the evidence for microbial life on the Earth, the first evidence, is locked within crystals of zirconium. This is recent evidence of maybe a decade ago. It's been found in crystals of zirconium that have been unearthed in several places on the Earth, but one of the important locations where this stuff has been found is the Jack Hills formation of mountains in Western Australia, and right here, and what is found inside of the rocks are these things here, which are essentially, almost certainly, the residues of bacteria. The arrows point to that. So that's the story, and this is the rock formation that shows the earliest evidence of microbial life and violent impacts. Let me get rid of this thing here. Impacts. So the standard story is that life emerged from a primordial soup, from just chemicals that were dumped on the earth. And that could really be completely ruled out, because in the early millennia, in the early millions of years, the earth was far too hot for this to have been possible. So there's now, I think, no question at the present time that life appears on the earth at the very first moment that it can survive. 4.5 billion years ago, in those rocks that were unearthed from Western Australia, you find the residues of bacterial life. So that was the first moment that life could survive on the earth, implying that life did not and could not have originated here on the earth in the hot conditions that prevailed, but came along with the impacting comets. Comets were hitting the earth, striking the earth for millions, for billions of years after that, and it's the comets then, we reckon, that brought life onto the earth from the universe at large. This is a direct the idea that life was confined to the earth and arose spontaneously goes back, of course, to Greek times, to the 3rd century BC, to the great philosopher Aristotle, who was a great philosopher in many ways, but he's also really quite blinkered in relation to life and the origins of life. He reckoned that life had to be confined to the earth and had to arise spontaneously on the earth, independently of the wider, bigger universe. And what he said was that a mixture of warm earth and morning dew could lead to the origin of life, could lead to mysterious and unlikely, improbable chemistry that it would eventually turn into life. And so this is the sort of representation of fireflies, he says, twinkling like stars in the sky. A mixture of warm earth and morning dew, he said, could lead to the production of life, even bigger than bacterial life, life in the form of insects and fireflies. So this was the backdrop that we had to contend with. And the problem for starting life on Earth, and indeed anywhere, is the complexity of life. At a molecular level, at the structural complexity of life at a molecular level is super astronomical, and there's no doubt about that. We've written a lot of papers and articles on this. The mind-blowing complexity of life at a molecular level, I believe, really holds the clue to its astronomical origins. We need an astronomical setting to overcome the super astronomical odds against which life is can possibly emerge. So for the simplest living cell, the specific molecular arrangements that are needed to achieve even the basic logic and functioning of a cell is, by any estimate that you can think of, super astronomical. There's no question about that. And Fred Hall and I express this improbability in terms of a metaphor. We reckon that this was like a tornado blowing through a junkyard, producing a fully working Boeing, in those days, Boeing 747 or 707. So that's the kind of statement that we made in scientific papers and also in our books, and this statement came up against a lot of criticism from the establishment scientists who said that we are now dealing with magic and not with science. Anyway, the alternative, of course, against such incredible odds being being sort of overcome to form life from non-life, as I said, the improbabilities are just on an enormous scale. The alternative is a concept that is called panspermia, and life's origin as a one-off, near miraculous event delivered to the planets by the agency of comets, then is just ruled out. So we need to expand on this, or to explore the idea of panspermia. Panspermia itself has, as Robert mentioned, has very ancient roots. It goes back in Western culture, at least to classical Greece, to Anaxagoras, who lived from 500 to 428 BC. He proposed that living seeds, called spermata, were distributed throughout the cosmos. So that's spermata, pans, meaning spanning the universe. Panspermia is life distributed throughout the cosmos. But even much earlier, in Vedic traditions that goes back around 2500 BC, or maybe even earlier than that, the idea of life being a cosmic attribute was widely prevalent, and it was regarded as being the natural explanation for life. So this is then going outside of the bounds of European science and European philosophy. The logic of panspermia follows from two really unarguable facts. And the first fact is really due to a very famous scientist called Pasteur, a French scientist, who in 1870 showed that microbial life, as far as he could observe it, is always derived from pre-existing microbial life. So you always had to have a microbe or microbial population if you're going to build upon that. If you're going to get more microbes, you need microbes to start with. And for example, he showed that processes such as the fermentation of wine and the souring of milk did not occur if there were no pre-existing microbes. So he sort of covered these fermentation dishes with various materials and prevented microbes from the air entering the sort of culture medium, and he discovered that no bacteria would grow. So he assumed that this is the answer, that the ability of microbes, the microbes are always derived from pre-existing microbes. And the second fact that he really stressed was that microbes have the ability to survive in the harshest imaginable environments, including conditions of deep space. And this latter fact, of course, the survivability of microbes in space, in deep space, has been amply documented in recent years, in the last few decades. The scientist who supported this idea very, very strongly was Hermann van Helmholtz, a great physicist, and he wrote the following. He says, "It appears to me to be fully correct scientific procedure if all our attempts fail to cause the production of organisms from non-living matter, to raise the question of whether life has ever arisen, whether it is not just as old as matter itself, and whether seeds have not been carried from one planet to another." And seeds being carried from one planet to another, of course, is a vindication of the Pasteur experiment, where he says that it's the seeds of life that are essentially the bacteria that cause fermentation and so on, and these are virtually indestructible. So the conclusions to be drawn from experiments that were done in the late 19th century, early 20th century, is that life is either a miracle that happened on Earth against incredible odds, and therefore, if that was the case, it will not be repeated anywhere else in the universe. And that's a very grim prospect to countenance. Or fully fledged genes, or the seeds of life, or bacteria and viruses that could be assembled into living structures, are distributed everywhere in the cosmos. And as the physicist Helmholtz stated, these develop wherever they fall on fertile soil. So comets in this whole scheme of things was emerging already in our reckoning in the 1980s as the prime candidate for preserving as well as distributing cosmic life in the form of bacteria and viruses. So cometary panspermia is the theory and the term that we use for this idea that Fred Hoyle and I proposed in 1980, and it asserts quite unabashedly, without any hesitation, we concluded that life, on the basis of all the known facts, has to be a cosmic phenomenon. Genetic components of life transported by comets to the Earth and to other similar planets must be the rule rather than the exception. So this is the conclusion that we reached in 1980, and we published a whole series of papers and books from that time onwards, elaborating on this idea that comets carry the seeds of life, carry the germs of life, and distribute it throughout the cosmos, throughout the galaxy, and throughout the wider cosmos. Now, is there evidence for other possible homes for life? Are there any other planetary systems that we can identify that could be suitable homes for life? And so this is the stage at which there was a very interesting space project called the Kepler project. The Kepler satellite was launched in 2009 by NASA, and it decided it was designed to find evidence for what were called exoplanets, planets orbiting other sun-like stars. So how many of such habitable planets there are was the question that had to be answered. And the Kepler Space Telescope, to this day, from 2009 to the present day, has found thousands of such satellites, and the grand total is 140 billion such planets in our galaxy. That's an estimate, of course, but and there are hundreds of similar galaxies, or hundreds of billions of similar galaxies in the universe. So you can tot up a huge, huge number, super astronomical number of planets that could be the homes for life. And the way that these planets are discovered by the Kepler satellite is they look at the telescope looks at the star, right, over a period of time, and the star, if a planet comes in front of it, dims, right? This is a planet going in front of the star. It dims, it dips, and then the intensity recovers. So that's how these planets have been discovered by the Kepler satellite. So there are many, I don't want to go into details, there are many individual planets that have been discovered, and people have talked about them. This is Proxima b, which is an Earth-like planet. It's is literally on our backyard, very, very within light years away from us. It's a cool red planet, the red star that is much older than our sun, which has evidence of a planet or planets. 2017, there were more habitable planets discovered. The TRAPPIST group of planets is supposedly located 39 billion light years away. This is the system. And so it goes on and on. But the most recent and breaking news in 2024 is a exoplanet that has been called K2186. K2186 made the headlines and only several weeks ago. It is at a distance of 120 light years away from the Earth, and it has a watery planet. They think it's the hot watery planet, warm watery planet, containing a molecule containing definite evidence for a molecule called dimethyl sulfide. And according to the guys who made this discovery, this chemical is only known to be created by phytoplankton, by life on the Earth. So this is a planet with an atmosphere at a distance only 120 light years away, which is a prime candidate for Earth-like life. Okay, we saw that. Dimethyl sulfide. And the grand total is, I think I already mentioned that the Kepler telescope studies leads to an estimate of 140 billion habitable exoplanets, that's planets like the Earth, in the Milky Way alone. And this implies that the average distance between habitable planetary systems is only 4 light years. So it's a very short distance to bridge if you're going to use comets or any sort of projectile to throw from one planetary system, from the solar system, from Earth to the nearest habitable planetary system. It's only 4 light years. So the idea of distributing life using comets or meteorites, icy meteorites, is really a real possibility that has to be considered. So panspermia, including the exchange of bacteria, viruses, and genes, I believe in 2024, has to be considered not just a possibility or a theory, but an inevitability across these very short interplanet distances. And of course, the transfer of these bacteria and viruses means the transfer of genetic information. Now, horizontal gene transfer is a well-attested phenomenon in Earth biology. We know that there are genes being exchanged between plants and insects, and between bacteria and ourselves, and so on. And this would lead, I think, if this horizontal gene transfer happened across cosmic distances, it would mean that there is a genetic similarity of all life in the galaxy. So when you ask the question, what would the life that exists in maybe in the nearest planetary system look like, I think the answer must be very similar to the life that exists on the Earth. Even if we do not know how, when, and where life first started, life must now imply anywhere. Life on Earth must imply that life is everywhere. That, I think, is a firm conclusion that we can draw from all the evidence that we have at the present day. The distance between these planetary systems is a few light years, and so that's, I think, inevitable. Evidence from cosmic dust and comets for life, bacterial life, is now about 20 or 30 years old. This is resulted from the 19th spectroscopic astronomical measurements from the 1970s, late 1970s onwards, showed that the cosmic dust is essentially made of material that is uncannily similar in their spectral properties to bacteria. This is a project that we started in the mid-1970s. We published a paper in 1974 in Nature saying that there's evidence of complex organics in cosmic dust, and this really continued through the decades, this project. And what has happened then since in 1978, we had a prediction that was based on experiments in the lab. This curve is a predicted behavior of bacteria in the laboratory, freeze-dried bacteria. And then the observations that were made months afterwards in Australia, in Anglo, and involving my brother Dal and David Allen, produced this curve which matched with the points that matched the curve so precisely that we thought that was it. This is absolutely the proof that life is everywhere
Chandra,
in the universe.
Chandra, if I may interrupt for a moment, just to make sure
Yes.
people wrap their brain around this graph. That is the discovery of life in space.
I think it is. I think there's no question the curve was a prediction. Okay, this was sorry, I don't know. Yeah, the curve was a prediction. This is the fingerprint of bacteria, the infrared fingerprint of bacteria, if a bacteria existed on a huge cosmic scale.
So, folks,
And
what that is the spectral pattern graph, if you will, the components of life, the components of light. Is that the dots, or is that the solid line? I can't see.
the solid line is the laboratory data for bacteria in the laboratory.
For bacteria,
right?
and then the other
Yeah.
line is the spectra for a cosmic cloud of dust,
Yeah,
right?
it's the behavior of dust
And the
all the way from
bacteria is
the
E. coli. So the absolutely heretical but undeniable conclusion is that was a gigantic cloud millions of miles across of E. coli. Correct, Chandra?
Absolutely. Yeah, of E. coli or bacteria that resembled.
Or another one of those coincidences, right?
Resembled E. coli to an extent that was almost inconceivable. So I think we reckon at this point. Fred was visiting Cardiff at the time. Dal was also visiting us in Cardiff, and when we put the two curves together and saw this, then Fred really jumped out of his seat and said, "This is it. We cannot. We have to assume that this is absolute proof." And that proof kept on being reaffirmed. Now, this again is this is again a very distant galaxy. No, I want to skip that, right? Okay, I think I've missed some of the slides that I needed to, which is a Comet Halley slide. But okay, let's go to this one. This breaking news from 2020.
Chandra, actually return to Comet Halley, because those were dust clouds. If you measure the spectra of comets as well, you see the same match.
Yeah.
So comets are seething balls of life. Now, that doesn't mean
absolutely.
it has non-living material. The vast majority of it, I would assume, Chandra, right, would be non-living material.
Yeah.
But what this desiccated and frozen, entombed life, as a general matter, needs is just add water and heat. So you have the water and heat of a comet, and then you have the desiccated, frozen, freeze-dried life. But on comets, it's not freeze-dried. It's actually alive, and it's spewing out constantly.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's that was the implication, and this is, continues to accumulate. The data continues to accumulate. This is only a couple of months ago, and the James Webb Telescope in 2024 finds life molecules that are connected intimately with life in a galaxy that was assumed to be formed only 1.5 billion years after the presumed Big Bang, if there ever was a Big Bang. And I think Robert described the whole story of the Big Bang. I think it's almost a joke, but that's the implication of the new results, that these life-related molecules, are being discovered all the way to the very edge of the observable universe. So in 2024, if we can summarize the evidence for biological molecules, biologically relevant molecules, these are found everywhere, from planets in the solar system to comets to interstellar clouds to exoplanets, and this is the recent discovery a few months ago, and even to the most distant galaxies that are being now observed by the James Webb Telescope. So the molecules of life are everywhere, and so how does one explain this? I think the conventional pundits are still wedded to the idea that these are essentially the products of abiogenesis taking place against all the odds, against the odds of a tornado blowing through a junkyard, making a fully working Boeing 747. So those are the improbabilities that are being multiplied, not 10 times or 1,000 times, but 1 billion times, if you believe in the conventional story. So the conventional story of life being just a spontaneous generation event is just so bogus that I really am absolutely fed up of even defending it. Evidence for life is there, certainly out in deep space and in the remotest galaxies. Cometary panspermia, which we proposed in 1978, requires comets to be both amplifiers and distributors of cosmic microbial life. I think, George, you discussed that a little bit now, and that's what they are. Comets are the carriers of life throughout the cosmos, the exchangers of life, the objects that exchange life and genes and viruses throughout the cosmos. So this is what we have at the moment, but there's still a lot of I think we already touched on this. I think I didn't show the right picture here. But what emerged after the last perihelion passage of Comet Halley in 1986 was this, I think you mentioned that, was the amazing coincidence between the data for Comet Halley, which are the points here, and the prediction of a bacterium. Again, just as in the interstellar dust, this created havoc in astronomical circles. It made headlines in the newspapers, but it also made us a lot of enemies. And this was the point at which all of my colleagues were saying that you are mad to think that comets are carrying these materials. This must be a coincidence. The fact that the comet Halley spectrum matched the infrared spectrum, matched the spectrum of a bacterium. So that's what is happening, continues to happen. This is the Rosetta mission that was European Space Agency, Rosetta mission to a comet that was launched in 2014. And you find evidence of cracks in the surface, of water underneath the cracked icy surface. And most importantly, I mean, this is getting a bit, can you see this image again? This is the same image of a bacterial spectrum. On my screen, our pictures are occluding the graph here. But this is a comet called 67P CG, and it shows that the surface reflectivity of the comet CG matches exactly the spectrum, the laboratory spectrum of a bacterium. So again, the situation is really quite. Let me just skip this. So in October 2015, there was a discovery of a profuse flux of ethyl alcohol, the kind of alcohol that you have in wine, and a sugar in the tail of this comet called Comet Lovejoy. Okay, this was in 2015, and and the rate at which the alcohol was produced in the comet was 500 bottles of this good wine every second. And they're clearly the products of fermentation. We published papers on it and so on. They've been ignored. But this was what was happening. But even more recently, in September of 2021, there's another comet, which is at a very great distance from the sun and really in the remotest outer regions of the solar system, 2 billion kilometers from the sun. And it acted in a very similar way to Comet Lovejoy. The surface was at a low temperature, much low temperature, minus 210 degrees Celsius, and it flared up in the course of a single day and produced vast quantities of volatile ejecta. So how can this happen if you don't have liquid material, fermentation, biology happening in the cold depths of space in comets? No one comments on it. No one has talked about it. But I think there is now, in 2024, very little doubt that comets are the carriers of life. So let me try to round this up by asking what are the further implications. So we come to the conclusion that comets do have evidence of life. There's evidence of life in interstellar dust that is, to my mind, unequivocal. Evidence of life in comets that are also unequivocal. But so viruses and evolution, I want to touch briefly on it. Viruses are everywhere on the Earth. If you take a single drop of ocean water, there's supposed to be 10 million viruses in every single drop of ocean water. So each of these viruses has a genetic program that can be inserted into living cells. So these are genes that are in the viruses, 10 million viruses in a single drop of water. And where does this come from? These come from the air, from the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is continually unleashing water, droplets of water, from higher up in the atmosphere. And so this is the reason that you're seeing so many viruses. And they must be falling continuously from the oceans because viruses have a very short lifetime. They degrade on a very short time scale. So viruses in the top layers of the ocean, the top millimeters of the ocean must be continually resupplied. And so this is why viruses are so important in this story, because viruses are the transmitters of genes across species. They could also produce diseases, and as Robert mentioned, we had argued about diseases coming from space. I don't think I'd have the time to go through that argument, but well, in our book, Evolution from Space, we wrote the following. If viruses are incident from space, then evolution must also be driven from space. Viruses do not always attack the cells they enter. A virus particle may add itself placidly to one another of the chromosomes of higher animals, and so viruses in our genes provide the potential for the evolution of brand new life forms. And now this statement, again, was very controversial because it essentially challenged the dominant paradigm that all of evolution is essentially Darwinian, that it's this random copying errors, random mutations, but new informational units were not considered at the time. So these are new units of information, intact units of information, incident from space, can occasionally cause disease, but can also lead to, on the longer term, to evolution of species. Recent studies have shown that viruses are involved in many of the transitions from one life form to another. For example, the development of placental mammals, which are crucial for ourselves, for the evolution of humans, crucial for evolution of advanced cognitive functions in animals and so on. All of these had to come from space. So the story is that we have original species, viruses from space creating new species, and so on. So this is the Darwinian natural selection acts on new genes from space to new genotypes. But a crucial aspect of this is the supply of new cosmic viral genes that give new information for new species and brand new developments. Okay, I think if you look at the history of life on Earth, we find that the great explosion of multicellular life happened relatively recently, some 540 million years ago. And this time, we know from impact history, asteroid comet impact history, coincided with an epoch of intense comet bombardment. So 450 million years ago, the Earth was being bombarded by comets, and you have this huge surge of new life forms. And even the later stages of our development can be traced to sudden breaks that are essentially could be connected with the arrival of new genes from space. Our bacterial viruses coming. I'm almost at the end now. The question I want to ask is: are bacteria and viruses from comets still coming to the Earth? Are they coming to the Earth today? And the answer is yes. If comets brought the first life to the Earth 4.1 billion years ago, that process could not have stopped. The Earth's orbit is enmeshed in a huge number of cometary orbits, And so this material is being shed on and they intersect the Earth's orbit, and so we have a steady inflow of cometary debris onto the Earth. So this is the orbit of these are the orbits of comets, the white orbits. The red is the orbit of the Earth, and it's enmeshed in cometary orbits. So these comets are continually depositing stuff that can fall on the Earth. And that's what we have now, about 100 tons of cometary debris coming into the Earth every single day. Some of it burns up, of course, as meteors, we have like meteors, but not all. A large fraction, in fact, survives. And the question is, could we prove this by actually collecting micro dust particles from comets and looking at them in the laboratory? And the answer is yes, but this has been done recently. And the answer is that it is positive. And the first such experiment was done in collaboration with the giant Nalika at the Indian Space Institute. We sent up a balloon to 41 kilometers with all these canisters that were evacuated, and they were opened when they reached 41 kilometers, and they just sucked in all the air, and these were brought down and looked at, and the contents looked at, and we found a huge quantity of living material. This is a clump of cocci and bacteria, bacillus that was found. And so viable and non-culturable bacteria were found in large quantities by using fluorescent dyes. And the total at the height of 41 kilometers, we reckoned that it was too high for lifting microbes from the Earth. There might have been a very small component or possibility of this, but we ruled it out. And so the estimated daily input of cosmic microbes onto the Earth is a staggering 0.1 tons per day over the whole Earth. This was what we found in 2000, at the dawn of the 20th century. And then 15 years later, we have the International Space Station being explored by Russian cosmonauts, and they found microorganisms, and they confirmed it not once, twice, but 6 times they found microorganisms on the surface. And of course, 400 kilometers is the orbit of the International ISS, and that's far, far too high for microbes to be lofted from the ground. So I think there is absolutely no doubt that microbes from space are falling to the Earth on a steady basis, even now, even at this very minute. So the life is being a cosmic phenomenon, then flatly contradicts the raising paradigm of spontaneous generation, Earth-centered life. So life as a cosmic phenomenon derives powerful data from astronomy, powerful data from geology, and powerful data from virology. Anyway, sorry, okay. I think that's one important point that I have to end on, and so this is the set of evidences: life as cosmic phenomenon, supported by astronomy. All the graphs that I showed you from interstellar dust, from comets, and so on. Geology, the existence of life in the oldest rocks, before there could be any spontaneous generation, before there can be any quiescent period, you find the bacteria inside the rocks. Then the connection between DNA and evolution, and we've written a lot about that. There's absolutely no doubt that our evolution of all life, is essentially determined by not only by Darwinian mutations and natural selection, but by the introduction of new genetic information from space. And then finally, the Indian experiment and the experiment of the Russians show that stratospheric collections of particles in the stratosphere, show clear evidence of life, microbial life coming in, even now, onto the surface of our planet. So there's scarcely any doubt, I think, now, today, in 2024, that life is a cosmic phenomenon, that we on the Earth are a part of a cosmic chain of life that connects our tiny little insignificant planet in which we are fighting all these great and big wars in Ukraine and so on. It connects this tiny, insignificant planet with the remotest corners of the cosmos. It's only that connection that remains to be the most important connection. But biology was perhaps there right at the beginning, and these are galaxies that are being discovered now that are far too young to have been formed in a Big Bang universe. So the Big Bang universe is, James Webb Telescope is telling us that it's already threatening the picture of the Big Bang, threatening, and in this in this instance, there's a cluster of galaxies that discovered a few months ago, and this cluster was supposedly formed long before galaxies had formed. This is the Big Bang story. Starting from nothing, you get all these particle formations of atoms and so on going through. So long before it is permitted for galaxies to have formed, we are finding galaxies. We are finding galaxies at redshift of 30, and the cosmologists are now scratching their heads violently and vigorously, drawing blood in the process, trying to understand how this could be. So this is the situation. This is another galaxy that is perhaps the most distant galaxy discovered so far, implying that it is now at a redshift of 16.7, at a distance, if you believe the distance to be a redshift, the redshift to denote a distance is 35 billion light years from Earth. And that's what we get. We galactic cluster here. We know at a point in time, according to Big Bang theory, where no galaxies could have formed. So the conventional wisdom is being seriously challenged. And so there are two models of the universe with life. The universe always has life, I think, to be considered. One is the Big Bang is, I think, out of the window. I'm sorry to say that. But there are two models that survive. One is a model by Roger Penrose and Turok, and this is the oscillations, an oscillating universe, nonconformist model. And then the Hoyle giant Nalika cyclic or quasi-cyclic universe, in which the universe it's essentially these oscillations that go on forever. So that's the present situation. This is in the creation destruction cycles that are consistent with Vedic cultures, in Indian Vedic cultures. Day and night of Brahma is supposed to be so many million light years long and so on. In such a universe of this type, oscillating universe, internal universe, life is ever present and it's an eternal attribute to the universe. So you cannot separate life and the universe. In the present year, the Big Bang bandwagon is almost falling over the cliff edge. So I think in the fullness of time, this would be hailed as the dawn of a new paradigm that is long overdue. Aristotle's spontaneous generation of life should be really finally confined to the dustbin, laid to rest. And so this is the story of it, and the story of Panspermia, starting with, as I said, ultimately starting with Indian culture, Vedic culture, then with Anaxagoras, the pre-Socratic philosopher, then Louis Pasteur, Svante Arrhenius, and then last of all, Fred and myself. So that's the end of the story. But I want to just finish. This is an amusing prophecy that was made by my friend Arthur C. Clarke, who also lived in Sri Lanka for most of his life, right? Arthur C. Clarke was the author of 2001, the science fiction writer and also a scientist, amateur scientist. And as an amateur, as a scientist, he made some very, very important contributions to society. He published a paper I think he was a graduate student at UCL, University College London. He published a paper on geostationary satellites being a possible mode, a possible way of linking the entire planet with radio and television signals, right? And when he proposed this, no one is willing to even publish the paper. So he published it in a rather remote magazine called Wireless World. And within a year of its publication, satellites were being launched left, right, and center all over across the planet. And now we have a network of satellites, geostationary satellites, that essentially is able to provide the link between me here in Cardiff, in London, and so on. It's all due to Arthur Clarke's predictions in the 1950s. So Arthur Clarke was also, I should say, one of the strongest, just as Robert Temple is one of the strongest supporters of our work, of Fred and me. And in a foreword to our book, this is a book by Fred, myself now, in 2001, he expressed this view. He said, once considered an heresy, science is moving towards vindicating exactly the ideas about the origins of life proposed over 2 decades ago by Chandra, Wickramasinghe, and Fred Hall. That Arthur C. Clarke, that's the sort of iconic prophet of science. And I knew him very well, as I said. And in this other book that he has just published about 10 years ago, called Greetings, Carbon-Based Bipeds, he makes many predictions of the future. And these are very amazing predictions because some of them have already come true. And there are others that I think lie in waiting. And some of the predictions that have come true is in 2024. This is a prediction for 2024. He says AI, artificial intelligence, exceeds by far the levels of human intelligence because it is constrained by, it is unconstrained. I should be slapped it wrong. Unconstrained by evolutionary forces. So this is in Arthur Clarke, one of his last book, forecasting that in 2024, in this year, AI will be rearing its head. And so it's happened, isn't it? We know with a lot of AI. And his prediction for 2061, Halley's Comet will have returned, and on it we will have found life forms that vindicate Wickramasinghe and Hoyle's century-old hypothesis that life exists through space. I think that's a long way off, and I certainly wouldn't be there by a long shot. My surviving children and grandsons, I'm sure, will lift a glass, if this comes true, to honor his grandfather and Fred Hoyle. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. We've just got some questions online, but folks are probably ready to get moving, so we'll just keep it to 2 or 3. Chandra.
Yeah, whatever you like. I mean, I was a bit, I think my IT system wasn't good enough. I was losing a lot of my sort of notes on the screen, so I had to stumble a bit. But I think I hope it came across okay.
No, it came across very, very well. No, it will. It'll be viewed by many people for years and years. All of this is recorded and live streamed. It'll be public soon enough. So Christopher Chasson asks, if fungi were prima materia, what were the conclusions of Chandra's work related to it as far as panspermia? Was it bacteria or fungi or both?
I think the answer must be both. The information that is needed to make the fungi were already there in the genetic bits and pieces that are everywhere in the universe. In fact, the viruses and the bacteria that are in between stars, in between galaxies, right across the universe, this stuff contains all of the information to make not just bacteria or funguses, but to make all of the life that we see on the Earth. Nothing of any great innovative significance happened here on the Earth has been our point of view. So every new development, I mean, Darwinian evolution is fine. It sort of corrects small mistakes. It makes organisms, animals, slightly by small changes, fitter to survive in various environments and so on. So that's all that Darwinian evolution does, and that's the reason for which we are essentially reviled by biologists, because we are sort of essentially relegating Darwinian evolution to a small corner of the story.
Chandra, you probably heard this one many times in many ways, but let's do it again. How was the life? It's oddly written. How was the life seed planted on comets in the first place? That's Lukas Androzhuki. And I cannot pronounce that, and I'm pretty good at that kind of stuff. How was the life seed originally planted on comets in the first place? Which is where a lot of people go. They're like, okay, yeah, it's from elsewhere. And you'll hear astrobiologists say this. I heard one on Sam Harris' podcast was confronted with panspermia by Sam, and she said, oh, well, that just means it came from somewhere else. Big difference.
Yeah,
that's a goddamn. I mean, let's go ahead and move to that paradigm and then figure out where it came from. But if it's everywhere, that's important. But go ahead, Chandra.
Yeah, I think the dilemma that faces scientists or faced scientists, if they accepted everything happening on the Earth, if they assumed that everything happened on the Earth, was that there wasn't enough time, there wasn't enough space on the Earth, there wasn't enough resources, material resources, to bridge the huge improbability gap. But if you go to the entire universe, and if you say the universe is infinite and eternal, then I think you've got to assume that anything was possible at the outset, isn't it?
That's right.
I think that would be my response. I don't understand how the universe came into existence. If it was there for eternity, then we are essentially hedging the question. But that's also not entirely true, because if it's eternally there for all time, that's it, isn't it? That's a fact, and we've got to accept the fact. So I don't accept the criticism because we didn't really elicit the details or outline the details of how life originated on a vast cosmic scale, that this has to be disregarded. I don't accept that. But the crux of the matter is that you need the biggest available cosmic system to overcome the biggest ever conceivable improbability, which is the origin of life.
You need a bigger boat. Chandra, in closing, I'll just point out to people that Aristotle actually said two things that stuck with us for some time, one longer than the other. He said that the Earth is stationary and the sun orbits us, and he said that life began here. It took us 2,000 years to toss that first stupid idea. That wasn't a stupid idea, but that mistaken idea out in the 1500s when Copernicus overturned it. But the other idea that life began here in a warm little pond has persisted to our own day. What you see here is the Copernicus of life that has put us in the proper context.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the same Copernican style revolution that has to happen, and it's long overdue. And I think it's something that we have to really fight very hard for, accepting facts and not a mythology that has no basis. Every single experiment that has been done to recreate the primordial soup, life from a primordial soup, and so on, using the best laboratories in the world, have produced a zero result, right? So I think there's no chance that it ever would be produced in the laboratory. You can make life from a pre-existing life. You can change life around. You can do sort of rearrangements of genes and so on in the laboratory. But to find the basic arrangements that transform non-life, non-living organic matter to living organic matter, that requires the entire universe and requires perhaps eternity.
Thank you very much, Chandra. I look forward to seeing you in Wales later this year, man.